in general, in your experience in looking at these artifacts, how well are they documented in terms of assumptions and requirements so that somebody, if I pick up someone's artifact, um, I know, what they had really expected me to be able to have that would help guide me. Yes, like, oh, you really do have to have an x86. You can't use an M1 chip.
Yeah, I think the quality varies quite a lot in my experience, right? There's in every artifact evaluation committee that I've participated in, there's generally, one or two A students, right, where the documentation is extremely complete and the scripts are all automated and it's very, very well laid out. And then there's sort of the long tail where those things don't get very well specified. Again, so it's hard to be too general, other than to say I think there's a spectrum, but I will say that their artifact evaluation has been around long enough that there are several high quality guides for people who want to produce high quality artifacts, and I could provide links to those for people who are interested. But it's no, if you Google for these things, they're not too hard to find. And there really is some good advice in there, including things like being able to have an artifact. So one of the problems with artifact evaluation, especially for very complicated artifacts, is that it takes so long to evaluate them, right? So if you want to reproduce every result in the paper, it will take you days and days and days. Right? But maybe the evaluator doesn't have that much time or enough resource to do all that. So one strategy is to say, well, here's an approximation. Here's a way to produce a subset of the results. Here's a way to do a small thing that's sort of a smoke test before you click the button that is supposed to run for days and days and days. Right. So anyway.
Okay, we've got a couple people lined up at the microphones here. We'll go ahead and start with Joe.
Hey, my name's Joe Hall from the Internet Society. First of all, thank you. I know how much effort it takes to create a keynote, and that was wonderful and just rich, and just thank you for that. Two questions, very quick ones. Do you think this could use an award with a purse or something to sort of lift the sort of art here and have people sort of competing beyond the badge, so to speak? And then the second question is, there was slide 26 on Eurosys 2022. One of the criteria was appropriately licensed, at least for comparison. And as a licensing nerd, I can just imagine, building these conglomerations of artifacts must have really strange licensing problems. And wondering if there's anything that may not be interesting at all, and you could totally ignore the licensing question if it's not.
Yeah. Well, let me try to respond. So I think so purses are always appreciated. So I guess I'll just say yes. That said, I think usually oftentimes the best paper award doesn't come with a purse, and that's fine. But I don't know. I'm not sure that people will be much more motivated by a purse. I mean, it's always nice to be recognized in that way, but I don't know that it's not like unless you've got like thousands of dollars to for the internet prize or something like that, right? The second one about licensing, yeah, that is an interesting issue. So one, licensing is an interesting issue in artifact evaluation and artifact availability in general, because there are lots of reasons that things might not be as freely available as we would like them to be. I think that on the examples that I discussed in my talk, I don't think that any of those are running afoul of any particular licensing arrangements. One, just because the indices, of course, are just linking to other sites, and the search project that David, Laura, and I are all evaluated in, those are also linking to other sites. We collect metadata about these things, but then we link it to the other sites. So we're not actually copying the artifacts in some sense, right? We're just pointing to them and talking about them. We do have metadata about them, and I don't think that the metadata is typically licensed. I mean, I'm allowed to say the name of the artifact or something. So.
And the search hub that we're working together to develop doesn't actually store the artifacts themselves. It just links to wherever their native location may be. All right, another question here in the room.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for being willing to talk about this, I think, often overlooked topic. So I was wondering where I can think of a lot of ways in which like cloud services could be used a lot to help with this. So, for AWS or something, you could make a VM image that is exactly clonable by anyone else, that specifies already, what the machine is, what the processor type is, what the OS is. You don't have to separately say, and then anyone can clone this and could run it and just see what the results are. But then I just wonder if there's been any moves. I'm thinking especially in terms of, I think of a lot of your examples where compiler optimization and stuff where you're running on one computer, but at Ndss, we're running network experiments, which are more complicated and maybe more than one machine or maybe a lot of them. But to do something like that, to have it reproducible in a container, costs money to hold those things, to have a VM image that someone else can clone in the future. So anyway, maybe I'm asking again about money, not about prizes. So I wonder where that money would come from to hold these VM images, or if you think that's even a sensible idea.
Yeah, well, these are all great questions, right? And I'm not sure that I have answers for all of it. So I guess the first thing I would say is that a lot of the artifacts, the responsibility for publishing the artifacts as it goes today is typically the responsibility of the authors, right? Whereas ACM or IEEE or something like that typically will produce a library of the papers. They tend not to produce a library of the artifacts, although I think that that's maybe changing a little bit in the ACM's case. You can submit supplemental materials, but again, I think the space might be bounded. It's more common that the authors themselves package up their artifact and put that on Zenodo. And I think typically that's a no-cost arrangement. But again, if you have very, very large artifacts, I think that would be a large issue. For the cloud resources, so I have been on program communities where we have, just like you get sponsorship for a conference, we were sort of getting sponsorship for the AEC, and we had a donation once from Microsoft, a bunch of cycles from Azure, right? Which we ended up not using, mostly because the artifacts that we were provided didn't really work in that context and were designed to work in that context. But so it still is an issue, right? You still need resources and things like that. What we've done in the past for some of these is using these public research facilities that are mostly sponsored by the National Science Foundation, at least in the United States. So my group, we run one called Cloud Lab, which is, you can sort of think of as a data center test bed, right? So you can come, researchers and students can use this for research and education purposes, and you can allocate some resources there, both virtual and bare metal, to reproduce networked systems experiments, right? So there's a way to do network systems experiments. Chameleon, which I mentioned in the talk, is another one of these platforms. Yeah, I mean, so I guess I want to say that there are resources available for doing both just regular artifact evaluation and networked systems evaluation. So.
Still had time for question. We've got another question here at the mic, and then I think Laura has a question. I've also got a few in case we have extra time.
Hi, I'm Philipp Rieger from TU Darmstadt. First, thanks a lot for this very good talk. It was very interesting. I was just wondering, because for me, this reproduction problems sounded a little bit comparable to the doping problem in sports. So can you imagine of why conferences do not just take a small percentage of papers that were accepted and basically try to reproduce them and give them to people to reproduce them, and if they are not reproducible, they are basically withdrawn from the conference. can you imagine, or do you know what is the reason for not doing this?
Well, I think that the primary motivation for artifact evaluation, right? I think that the main concerns there came out of, let's call it rigor and sort of honest mistakes, or people. I think that the presumption here is that the people who are publishing papers in peer-reviewed conferences are not just writing fiction, right? But they may or may not be doing a good job of the science, right? But they're not really lying to you either, right? So artifact evaluation, I think, was not really designed as a process for catching cheaters in this way. So I think in this sense, right, it's not analogous to the doping problem, right, where doping is, cheating, and so I think that, I guess I want to say that we're not suspicious of the authors. I think for the most part, maybe we should be. Maybe there is, out and out fraud somewhere, but yeah, but anyway, I guess I want to say the current practices are not designed to detect that. And actually, so one of the things that's been said about the replication crisis, why isn't the replication crisis in computer science as significant as it is in other fields of science? And they say, well, it's because, in fact, nobody actually, the stakes are so much lower. So that's right. I mean, if pharmaceutical studies convince people to take the wrong drugs and they do a lot of damage to people, that's a high societal cost, right? But if I'm wrong about the soundness of my program analysis, well, that's probably not going to ruin people's lives. So,
Thank you.
I'm not. That was kind of a vague answer. I realize.
Okay, we still have a few minutes. I've got another person at the mic, and Laura, I think you had a question. Do you want to wait, and we'll go with the mic?
Yeah, no, go with the mic, and anybody other than you and I can always ask Eric.
Right. All right, Joe.
So it's Joe Hall from Internet Society. Please, anyone else, please come up and ask questions. This is great stuff. Simple question, I think. How much of this is an archiving problem, or when it gets down to, like I saw the quote from the earlier study, not Patrick Trainer's, but the other one where, just unrecoverable data. And I have a study I did in my past that I really regret that the data is no longer available for, and it's an archiving problem. That machine just does not exist anymore, and it should. So I'm wondering, how much could be done by providing sort of a place that we can at least know for a certain amount of time these certain parts of the artifacts will be available, so that even if you're just linking to them, you'll have some guarantee that for 10 years, I mean, to the extent we can make
Sort of the legacy equipment problem.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an interesting question. I mean, ultimately, humans are now creative and messy creatures, right? And we're bad about following rules consistently, right? And so this is how we lose things and change our minds, and do one thing one day, and then a different thing the next, and we can't. And it's how you end up with a paper that's final 3, whatever. So I guess what I would say about the value of artifact evaluation and replication in the community here is that by setting the expectation that but basically by planning that you're going to make this stuff available eventually, and other people would look at it and see it, the idea is that puts you in the mindset of saying that you should be following particular rules. And our community has gotten to the point where certain rules are followed, right? It's pretty rare these days that I have to complain to my graduate students about how they forgot to check in the source code, right, for whatever project that we're collectively working on, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, I didn't add the source code to the repository. Oh, and I didn't change the build system so that it would, because nobody is going to invoke the compiler by hand, right? It's just too much work, and it's just not the process, and nobody considers the alternative, right? But for data and those kinds of things, people do still consider the alternatives, and for poor documentation, bad readmes, and things like that, we still have those problems. But the idea is, I think, that by setting the goal, right, we're more likely to be able to fit our practices to that expectation. Is what I want to say, right? That's not going to change human nature, right? We're still going to be, messy and inconsistent creatures, right? But I think that by having the star, right, that we can navigate to, we're more likely to get to our goal, and we've sort of, like I said, set an expectation that that's where we're going, and so people are more likely to join us on our travel, I guess.